A few years back, there was a group of us that went for a hike, and we decided we were going to meet at the International House of Pancakes in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. And so all of us showed up at the restaurant at the same time except for one person. Mark Evans was missing. And so I got on the phone to call him. I said, "Mark, where are you?" He said, "I'm in the International House of Pancakes in Pigeon Forge." Well, it turns out everybody else in the group was in the wrong place. We were at the International House of Pancakes in Sevierville. And so I said to Mark, "It's lonely being right, isn't it?" And he said, "Chris, you have no idea." Well, if it's lonely being right under most circumstances, it is especially lonely to be right in the midst of a pandemic. We're in a time of isolation and a time of social distancing when the infection rates in our community are going up. So this is no time to open up a church or open up a concert hall or open up bars. This is a time where we need to close the doors of the church, and we need to close the doors of some public social places where we get together, because the rate is going up, not down. Indeed, we are seeing exponential growth of the virus, and that creates incredible challenges for us as a community. And while it's not a popular thing to say, this impulse to open up things quickly, well, the quicker we try to open things up, the longer we're going to have to keep things shut down. So patience is a very important part of moving forward. The American economy is too often structured towards short-term gains without any attention to the long-term pain that those short-term gains create. And so the American economy has a different message than we who are members of the church. In the church, we tell people, you need to keep your eyes on the prize. You need to keep your hand on the plow. As the scripture tells us, let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not faint, if we do not give up. It is lonely being right, but now is not the time to grow weary. Now is not the time to give up. Now is the time to persevere, because it is always the right time to do the right thing. I've just returned from vacation and study leave, and one of the great things about getting away from the church is we get a little bit of a perspective on our work in the church. And when I came back and I saw the title of the sermon that I was supposed to give this morning, I thought to myself, that's a terrible title. And so I've decided to change the title. The title was originally going to be Perfunctory Belief and Prophetic Practice. And I am sticking with that theme, but I decided we needed a better title. And so this morning, the title for our sermon is When Religion Becomes a Bad Habit. Religion becomes a bad habit when we hold on to it tightly, so tightly that we do not notice the people who are being harmed terribly by our religion. If you read the Hebrew prophets, they are always shaking at their fists. They're shaking their fists and decrying the people who are turning faith into a bad practice, turning faith into something that hurts people, turning faith into something that ignores the needs of the hungry and the poor and the people crying out for justice. If you read the Sermon on the Mount and the teachings of Jesus, he also is always decrying and shaking his fist at the people who are making religion a bad habit. You hear it in Buddha and Confucius and Muhammad. There is this tendency among prophetic leaders to see that religion can be good, but it can also become bad. The other day, I was driving to take a hiking trip in the mountains, and I passed a very small church with a very crowded parking lot. They were holding Sunday services in the middle of a global pandemic, and I could tell because of the number of cars and the size of the building that they couldn't possibly be keeping social distance. And so as I drove by in my car by myself, I felt a little bit envious of their community and their chances to get together. And so I was especially aware that it's lonely to be right, because I was being very intentional about keeping social distance that day. And I had intentionally picked out a trail in the mountains that I thought would not be very crowded, the Mount Sterling Trail. And I went to that trailhead, and sure enough, there was only one car in the parking lot. And I didn't see a single soul while I climbed up to the top of the mountain. And I had an hour to myself on top of the fire tower where I could watch those ocean waves of blue-green hills sort of flowing off into the distance and a river of clouds flowing above me. So I had this wonderful hour of meditation. And then I heard some noise coming up another trail, because there's more than one path that leads to the top of Mount Sterling. And so I decided to descend the tower and take my path back to my car. Now, we often speak about spirituality as path, choosing a path in life. And in the Unitarian Universalist Church, we often say there are many paths that lead to the mountaintop. And that's true of Mount Sterling, and it is true of spirituality. But in the midst of a global pandemic, it's very important for us to choose the right path, or to choose a good path, to choose the path that will keep us and everyone we love safe. And so there are many paths to the mountaintop. But at the Tennessee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church, as we navigate these dangerous times, we are trying to make sure that we as a community choose the right path and do the right thing. Well, here I am in one of the church bathrooms, and you may be wondering why. Well, if you go to the restroom at the Mount Zion Baptist Church, they have a sign that says, "No smoking. God is watching you." Now, here in the Unitarian Universalist Church, we don't have a sign like that, because sometimes you don't have to have an outward sign when you know an inward truth that smoking is not good for our health. And so we would be wise to do better choices, to make wiser decisions with our life. Sometimes we don't need an outward sign when we know an inward truth. Now, here's a truth that I want to let you know if you don't already know it. You may not know this, but right now, singing in church or singing in a choir is more dangerous than smoking cigarettes. Right now, singing in church should have a Surgeon General's warning. If Will Robinson were to pick up a cigarette, robot would go, "Warning! Warning, Will Robinson!" So we need a Surgeon's General warning to remind us that singing in church is hazardous for our health for the present moment. One public health official said it's like going into a room and coughing on each other. So today, I'm asking you, the members and friends of this church, to do something very difficult. I'm asking you to trust the leadership of this church more than you trust your own government. You may not know this, but the White House pressured the Center for Disease Control to retract and take away the warning about how dangerous it is to sing in church, the warning about how dangerous it is to have a church choir. So those are removed from the official CDC guidelines. So it's like the tobacco companies who tried to make sure we didn't have the information we needed to know how dangerous tobacco is. Now there are forces at work trying to keep you from knowing how dangerous church can be. However, if you've ever had a loved one who died from lung cancer, you know how bad tobacco can be. And if you've had a loved one who's died from COVID-19, you know that that is a very horrible way to go. Our federal government is threatening to withhold funding from those public schools that refuse to open in the middle of a global pandemic when infection rates are spiking. That is breathtaking stupidity. Breathtaking stupidity. So I'm asking you to do the opposite. I'm asking you, let's work together to fully fund this church where leaders are working hard to make the most responsible decisions and to choose the right path that will guide us as a community together through this pandemic. One of the ways that religion goes bad is that it can focus more on the abstract instead of the material and the physical. It can get more consumed about our hopes for the hereafter, and it can forget the problems of the here and now. But I agree with a sign I once saw in an Anglican church. I went there was a booth set up where you could put some money in to help the needy in the community, and the sign said, "We believe in life before death." And that is what we believe in our congregation right now as we're navigating this dangerous time. We believe in life before death. And we believe everything we do to enhance this life before death. We agree with the social gospel preachers who said, this is the work of salvation. Someone sent an email to the leaders of this church saying that we were failing to lead. That we were failing to lead because we hadn't opened up the church like many other congregations are opening up all around us. But we are not failing to lead. We are doing what the White House refuses to do. We are doing what the Congress refuses to do. We are doing what the governor and the state legislature refuses to do. We are leading. We are choosing the right way. At the Tennessee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church, we're trying to do the right thing, and we're trying to choose the right path. But we will be the first to admit that it is not always easy being right. It is lonely being right. All around us, there are congregations that are opening up in the midst of this global pandemic. However, it's also true that in the 1950s and 60s, many congregations practiced racial discrimination and supported segregation, but our congregation did not. In the 70s and the 80s, many congregations opposed the Equal Rights Amendment and opposed the ordination of women, but our congregation did not. In the 1990s and the 2000s, there were many congregations that were opposed to GLBT rights and kicked people out of their congregations because of their sexual orientation. And some families even kicked their children out of the families, but we did not. And now, in the year 2020, many congregations are opening up their doors in the midst of a global pandemic when the rates of the virus are increasing, but we will not. We will not. While we have no reason to be completely complacent at this moment in time, I'm preaching midweek, at this moment in time, we do not have a single member of this congregation who has been diagnosed with COVID-19. And we have not had to do a single memorial service for someone who has suffered from this virus. And I have colleagues in the ministry that would love to be able to say that. So I want to thank you for cooperating with us to create a congregation so that we can all come back together in this building one day and all be able to see our friends, and no one will be missing. I also want to thank all the people who have made special efforts to support our outreach ministries, who volunteered to deliver groceries to people in need through the fish program, or make meals for Family Promise for families that would otherwise be homeless, or contributed to the Helping Fund, or in any way supported our efforts to make sure in this time of high unemployment, our congregation is a force for compassion in our community. And let me say, I think future generations will look back at this day in our history, and they will see that we as a congregation are who we are and are who we have always been, leaders in the community, leading the way. In the year 2020, too many people are trying to turn religion into a bad habit. Some people have turned religion into a form of consumerism, passive consumerism, when it's meant to be about co-creation, co-creativity, building community together. Some have turned religion into jingoistic nationality, when it's supposed to be jingoistic nationalism, when it's supposed to be all about peace on earth and goodwill to all people. Some have turned religion into a commodity of comfort and convenience when it is meant to be a spirituality of challenge that forces us to grow and to change and to move. Some have turned religion into oppression when religion is meant to be about liberation and freedom. Some have made religion about who they hate and who they want to exclude when it's meant to be about who we love and who we want to include. Some have made religion about cautious fear, but we feel it is all about courageous faith. Some have made religion into capitulation to the status quo, the way things are, when it's meant to challenge us to grow, to make this world into what it is meant to be and who we are meant to be. So let's do what others have failed to do. Let's lead. Let's be leaders. Let's work together to co-create a congregation where everyone can be healthy and free, and a community in a world where everyone can be healthy and free. Let's make the right choices so that together we can comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Let's move forward in faith, not fear. And let's do this as a team. Let's do this together as a community. For if we work together, there is no reason why any one of us should feel alone.